Hi everyone, so in today's lesson we moved on from SAT reading questions on comprehension to making inference. So what is inference? It is a logical conclusion drawn on presented evidence. You will be asked to draw this conclusion on your own based on information presented in the passage. It is a more advanced question, especially when a lot of students tend to go from finding a logical conclusion, which must be true, to a likely probability. So, we will learn how to ensure our inference does not steer away from the facts, so you can guarantee an 100% accuracy on this question type. The inference question usually comes with this question: which choice most logically completes the text? So sometimes they are called text completion questions. Either way, they ask you to find a valid conclusion using given information without speculation. So a good rule of thumb to remember is an inference made from the given text must be true. Let's solve this question with a general approach first. The rough idea is we must use the information presented in the passage to infer how reef fish would be perceived by a predator far away. How to get this paraphrase so quick? You need to bind together some previous reading skills. First, look for the main idea and the structure. The conclusion should support this main idea as a whole. We see a structure of old idea and new idea here because of the contrast conjunction but and indicators of new ideas like recent studies. Jot down the main idea as you read through the passage. The topic is reef fish. So what that talks about the ability to use their appearance to evade capture. The last two sentences serve as the explanation for the observation or findings presented in the second sentence. That's the structure of the passage. Now, we know the main idea, we know the purpose of this conclusion. We can, of course, eliminate answers that directly contrast to the main idea like A and B, or something off topic like D. These are necessary conditions, but not sufficient. The sufficient condition to a logical conclusion is that it is essentially just slightly twist the previously stated information, and you can only verify this by understanding both the evidence and the mechanism to twist such logic, which will be covered later as the main technique of today's lesson. But first, for this question, with just elimination using the necessary condition, that is, support the main idea and not off topic, you know the answer is C. But let's verify how C makes a logical twist to the evidence. We now need to look into details of reef fish appearance, paraphrase them to keep the core information. They are eye-popping or eye-catching and colorful, but they have contrasting lines that help them blend in the background, which makes it difficult for the predators to distinguish. In simple words, their colorful appearance helps them blend in the background. Scientifically speaking, we also know that this will be hard for predators to see them from a distance or with movement. Given the summary, we can conclude that from far away, predators have a hard time seeing brightly colored reef fish because they blend in with the background, which is essentially what answer C is after paraphrasing. That seems too obvious, but well, that's the point. An inference is not an oracle. It is a must-be-true statement. So the leap from the passage to the conclusion is not that big. This second example will demonstrate how too far of a leap a wrong answer can be. To begin, reiterate the key information from the passage and the question. Try to focus on the fundamentals and not get too distracted by challenging languages. Even if you don't know what olfaction is, you can figure out that it refers to the smelling ability. The first sentence states that only 5% of the brain involves smell, which corresponds to the idea that olfaction is treated as a bonus sense. Basically, the human brain largely focuses on processing visual information and neglects scent or olfactory information. As a result, people don't have a lot of words to talk about smells. and this creates a problem for studying smells scientifically. The summary can serve as the conclusion on its own, and B is an excellent match for that idea. If people cannot accurately and consistently describe what they're smelling, it becomes very difficult for researchers to gather information about how people use that sense. Now let's look at the wrong answers. A is taking a way too big of a leap by assuming that they are asking for more money to study how people process odors. Just because the scientific investigation is hindered by how people describe smells, you don't need to find a solution to these existing problems. That's not a must-be-true logical conclusion that the SAT is looking for. C draws a way too big conclusion from one detail instead of sticking to the main idea, or it lacks the necessary condition. Sure, it indicates that a much larger portion of the brain is devoted to vision and that people do not think about smell as much. This answer takes two pieces of factual information and puts them together in a way that sounds vaguely intimidating but is actually insignificant. D implies recommendations regarding what people should do when they encounter new scents, which again, not a must-be-true conclusion. So, some good tips to take away here. If the answer is a suggested solution, a recommendation, a probable scenario, or a warning, it's not an inference, and hence not the correct answer. To hone the skill of twisting the evidence for a logical inference, let's look at some tips and drills. The idea of a logical inference is essentially rewriting the sentence by flipping some words to infer information that ensures they must be true, or to ensure we are not speculating. There are two tips to navigate this flip. First is negative wording, which can be seen in this example. Instead of using odor, we can use an equivalent negative expression as not younger than. Some other examples can be more sophisticated than can be rewritten as not simpler than, or more beneficial than is equivalent to not more harmful than, or more flexible can be not more rigid, or more optimistic is also not more pessimistic. We can also double down this tip to flip and double negative wording like this. Not impossible means possible, or not uncommon is common, not insignificant is significant, not unacceptable is acceptable, not inaccurate is accurate. This double negative wording is very common in SAT, so pay attention to them and use them as cue to flip for inference. In summary, to make twist for inference in the SAT without going to the extreme, find cues that can either be a comparison like this to paraphrase into a negative equivalent, or a double negative and flip them into a direct meaning. Let's do some drills to make some proper inferences without suggested answers. There are multiple cues and flipping drills in one passage, so let's take time to read through to practice noticing these cues and making proper inferences, and feel free to come up with more on your own. There are a couple of key pieces of information in this example. First, the passage concerns with a type of muscular contraction that is most effective at increasing muscle strength and size. We can flip this information and say that all other types of muscular contractions are less effective or not as effective at producing this outcome. This is an example of using the negative wording technique. Next, this type of contraction occurs only when people lose weight, that is, when they are not raising the weight. Another way to use negative wording technique to flip this information as well. If we put those two statements together, we can logically conclude that people who want to build muscle strength and size should focus on exercises that involve lowering weight as well, or that raising weight is a less effective way of building muscle strength and size than lowering weight is. So for this example, we want to show you how easy it can be to make an extreme leap and hence a wrong inference, something that goes from a must-be-true logical conclusion to may be true because of strong assumptions. The first sentence states that conservation efforts largely focus on protecting vulnerable hatchlings once they emerge. We can therefore conclude or make a flip to infer that the conservation efforts are less focused on protecting hatchlings before they emerge or when they are still in their shells. What happened after they emerge, or in other words, what happened to the vulnerable hatchlings that the conservation efforts need to protect them from? The second sentence tells us that the conservation effort is directing the hatchlings from the bright lines of towns and move to the sea. So a must-be true inference can be bright lines of towns represent danger, and that encouraging the hatchlings to move towards the sea is a way of protecting them. This is one of the inference you can draw from these two sentences. The first one tells us that we protect vulnerable newborn turtles, and the second one tells us what the actual protection regimen is. Wrong inferences can be protecting sea turtles only after they hatch is the only way or best way to conserve the species, or this method of directing away from the town and towards the sea is the only way or the best way to conserve. So, the passage only tells us when and how these methods are used. It tells us nothing about their effectiveness, either in absolute terms, like this is the best way, or in a comparison to other approaches, like saying that this is better than other ways. So avoid making such extreme inferences when you do not have the supporting evidence. Another way of using the negative wording tip is not literally, but mathematically, or just using some common scientific knowledge like this. We are told that 14% of earthquakes since 2000 have been supershear events, so a proper inference can be most earthquakes, or 76% since 2000, have been other types. This is one way of flipping the logic that still ensures the logical accuracy. Another cue you can use to flip is supershear quakes were believed to occur much less frequently, so this type actually occurs much more frequently than researchers used to believe. In fact, if researchers only obtained their inaccurate estimate by looking mostly at supershear quakes on land, then many supershear quakes must not occur on land, or logically, they must occur underwater instead. That is the only other option on Earth for a quake. We cannot, however, draw conclusions about the statistics or frequency of earthquakes, either supershear or otherwise, before 2000. Or we also cannot infer anything about why researchers focused primarily on land and neglected to consider the oceans. Now let's put everything together in a SAT inference question. Remember to combine the necessary condition, which says that the conclusion is not off topic and has to support the main idea, as well as the sufficient condition, by checking for flippable cues and draw proper inference from those evidence. In this first example, the convoluting structure may make you dizzy to find the main idea, but it's just a divergent way of the old versus new idea structure, where the first two sentences explain an existing understanding and the rest explain the new findings, which is the main idea. Here, the first two sentences tell us that we don't really know anything about singularity. The first two set up the problem, science has a gap. But then, the third sentence appeared like a new idea. It resolves the discrepancy previously introduced by saying that although singularities may involve all sorts of mysterious processes, they have no real-world effect, and thus scientists can ignore them. So, it doesn't really matter in practice. We can jot down that the main topic is about singularity, and the so what is that it has many gaps in scientific knowledge, but these gaps can be ignored. The correct answer must restate or be consistent with this idea. By just using the necessary condition, you can eliminate three off-topic or contradicting answers to the main idea. B focuses on the old idea, the gap in knowledge, so it's contrast with the main idea. And C and D both suggest that engaging further with the mystery can be the way to go, which directly contradicts the conclusion that the mystery can be safely ignored. They are giving solutions or they are giving suggested recommendations to the problem, which is something you should not look for in an inference. Once you have eliminated 3, A is the only one left standing, and it checks out on its own merits too. A is correct because if singularities do not have an effect, then scientists can treat everything as normal and apply the usual law of physics. This is essentially a safe flip. It supports the main idea and makes a very small leap. The passage says that scientists can ignore singularities, and what does ignoring something allow you to do? It frees you to proceed as normal. That's exactly what apply standard laws with confidence means. The second example also has a classic old versus new idea structure. The old idea is a common practice. Grocery stores spray produce with water to keep it looking fresh. The new idea flips this entirely, saying that spraying has no practical purpose and actually causes harm. Let's write out the main idea. Water spraying on produce is useless and actually harmful. The blank needs to complete the deleterious effect, meaning whatever fills it must name a specific negative consequence of the spraying. Let's eliminate with the necessary condition. C is immediately off topic. It's about boiling vegetable, which has nothing to do with the store spraying. D says produce must be watered at predictable intervals to appeal to customers. This actually supports the spraying practice, which directly contradicts the new idea or the main idea, so it must be gone. A is about shoppers avoiding dry produce. This is about consumer psychology, not about any harmful effect of the water itself. And it's also more consistent with the old idea, justifying why stores spray water than the new one. So it also contradicts with the main idea, so it must be gone. Why is B correct? B says moisture causes picked vegetables to spoil faster. This is exactly the deleterious effect that the blank calls for. It's a safe flip. The passage says that spraying causes harm, and B names a specific harm, making it spoil faster. No logical leap required, just a direct completion of what the sentence already sets up. More advanced examples will require a bigger leap, but still must be true inference, like this third one. The passage has the same old versus new idea structure. The old idea is the common assumption. Cognitive bias clouds how we perceive the people around us, and the new idea introduced this concept that people are actually quite accurate at gauging what their friends and family believe, because we have evolved as social creatures with strong social sensing ability. So the main idea here is people are really good at reading their social circles, and the social sensing ability is reliable. So the answer must be a logical consequence of social sensing being accurate, like maybe an application or something. Let's eliminate with necessary condition first. C says that we can discover what people believe by asking them to reflect on their own personal bias. This has nothing to do with social sensing, and it is not supporting the main idea. D talks about developing an algorithm to predict preference. This drifts entirely off topic, and it is a recommendation. So this is not the right inference. Remember that the passage is about human social perception, not algorithmic prediction, and we are not giving suggested recommendations for inference. Between A and B, let's analyze the sufficient condition. Which one produced a proper inference that is also must be true based on the evidence in the passage? B is a very tricky one because it says that we can determine people's view by analyzing how they interact with others. This is in the right topic of how to understand someone's belief, but the main idea of social sensing isn't about observing social interaction. It's about using what these people sense about their circle as a proxy instead of self-depiction, or in simpler words, using people's read of their circle instead of asking people directly about themselves is more reliable. So even though it somewhat aligns with the main idea, it didn't have the correct flip from the evidence. The passage never says anything about observing how people interact. It says people can accurately report what their circles believes. B introduce a completely different mechanism like a behavioral observation. That's a new idea that the passage doesn't support. A says that we can gather accurate information about trends by asking people about their social circles rather than their own beliefs. This is actually a direct and clean flip. If people are accurate sensors of what those around them think, then asking, what do your friends believe, gives you quite reliable data. So the flip from people's estimation of what their friends and family believe to ask about their social circles is a larger leap than the previous question, but still a very safe one. This fourth example, lengthy as it seems, is actually just another version of old versus new idea structure. The old idea or the common belief is that Indo-European language was spread by Anatolian farmers, but in fact, the new idea or the main idea of the passage states that the Yamnaya nomads were the one who spread this language. The last sentence provides the DNA evidence for such new findings. First, let's do the elimination. B says that the Yamnaya were a genetic blend of 3 Eurasian populations. This is about their own genetic origins, not about them spreading the language. It doesn't support the main idea at all. D says the Yamnaya were linguistically unique compared to the other group. This is right, maybe, but it's off topic because the passage is about DNA evidence of language spreading, not linguistic uniqueness, and this doesn't confirm anything for the main idea. So between A and C, let's apply the sufficient condition. A says that the tribes arrived in Germany between 2500 and 2000 BCE. This is in the right direction, but notice what's missing. It only mentions Germany, one specific location, and doesn't mention the Yamnaya by the name. The main idea is about a broad geographical spread of the Yamnaya across Europe and Asia, hence the Indo-Eurasia language. A single arrival point in Germany is too narrow to count as proof of widespread language diffusion. It's a partial flip at best. But C says that around 5,000 years ago, Yamnaya genes began appearing throughout Europe and Asia. This is the clean, complete flip that we need. The passage established that the Yamnaya lived on the Eurasian steppes 5,000 years ago and were the proposed spreaders of the Indo-European languages. DNA showing their genes appearing across both continents at exactly the same time frame is the must-be true confirmation that the blank calls for. The leap here is slightly larger. You have to connect genes spreading throughout Europe and Asia to language spreading, but it's a safe one. If the Yamnaya's genes are showing up everywhere, it means they migrated everywhere, and migration is exactly the mechanism by which they would have carried their language with them. Well, this example is actually the most complicated one so far, but we can still break down the structure first and get the overall main idea. The Q, another possibility here, indicates a two-theory structure like the old versus new idea we have seen so far. So the first half, or the old idea, tells us that Mars is created by a titanic collision, resulting in an all-encompassing magma ocean that cools down to a crust with high levels of basalt. The new idea essentially contradicts with this basalt-rich crust findings. They think that parts of Mars' first crust had a different origin, one that is high in silica rather than basalt. So the answer as a part of the new theory must be a logical inference that directly follows from finding silica-rich minerals in the oldest region of Mars. A says that portion of Mars surface was never covered by a crust. This passage says nothing about crust absence. Both theories describe how the crust formed, not whether it formed at all. So this is off topic. D says that first crust didn't develop until after Mars formed. This is about timing, the when, which the passage never addresses, also off topic. C says the southern hemisphere contained more silica than previously believed. This is very tempting because the finding does involve silica in the southern hemisphere, but notice the trap. The passage already tells us the second theory predicts higher silica concentrations, so finding silica there isn't any surprising new quantity claim. It's confirmation of which theory is correct. So C makes a narrow factual statement when the conclusion drew was much bigger. B says that the magma ocean was not all-encompassing. This is a very precise and must be true flip because the magma ocean theory or the old theory predicts a uniform basalt crust, which is the result of the magma ocean cooling down, covering the entire planet. Finding silica-rich feldspar in the oldest region directly contradicts that uniformity. If the first crust in the southern hemisphere was silica-based rather than basalt-based, the magma ocean couldn't have covered everything, so it's not all-encompassing. The leap here requires connecting feldspar and silica findings back to what the magma ocean theory specifically predicted, but it's a safe flip. High silica in the oldest crust, the basalt-producing magma ocean didn't cover this region, so the magma ocean was not all-encompassing. The last example is a slightly different way the SAT can test your inference skills. Instead of making a leap from the entire passage, you can make a logical guess from just items in the list mentioned right before the blank space. The first two examples in the list describe situations in which things run backwards. So logically, the final item in the list must describe a normal occurrence that is reversed. A, B, and C all describe generic physics statements with no consistency to the list. Objects interacting unpredictably, planets remaining in motion, and particles of different weights moving at varying speeds are not examples of any familiar phenomenon running in reverse. Only apples rising back to a tree rather than falling from one illustrate the concept of backward motion, showcasing a subtle but proper flip from the concept to the example. D is then correct. Also, a fun thing to notice here is how the SAT rewards you by circling back to the Newton's famous apple example and completes the list with its mirror image. These examples definitely represent the more advanced level questions in the SAT reading to distinguish higher percentile test takers. So it is important to apply what you have learned in this lesson today in the quiz right below the lecture and read through the explanation if you need to. And don't forget to score yourself with the homework of today's lesson. You can also further practice this type of question with different difficulty level in the domain practice mode by filtering for the inference skill in the reading and writing portion.